Many thanks, sincere thanks to Dr. Balavenkat and his team for inviting me to be part of this excellent educational extravaganza. Thank you so much. And after the preceding talks, clinical talks, very interesting talks, I think this topic might be a little drier. The topic given to me is transient neurological symptoms. Do they exist? Let's take this case scenario as for a TURP. You have a 58-year-old man, a local VIP posted for TURP. Chronic smoker, very often this is the case. Chronic smoker, diabetic, hypertensive, has history of ischemic heart disease. He's been off clopidogrel under your instructions for a week, but he's on aspirin 75 milligram per day. He's admitted as a daycare surgery, spinal anesthesia with 1.2 ml of 5% lidocaine, heavy is given because you know your surgeon is fast, uneventful procedure lasting only 15 minutes. Patient recovers well from spinal anesthesia and fit for discharge in 3 hours' time. 6 hours later, you get a call saying he's developed pain in the back and buttocks, radiating to lower extremities, very severe, unable to do routine activities due to pain. You really don't know what to do. You just prescribe some NSAIDs and you start wondering, now what is this I am dealing with? Have I created a cauda equina syndrome? Is it spinal hematoma? Yeah, he was off clopidogrel, but you never know. Was there a neural injury without my knowledge? Or is it just transient neurological symptoms that I am dealing with? Well, then you relook your literature. I'm sure you already know about it, but you'll relook and realize that, yeah, of course, in transient neurological symptoms, the important thing is it's exclusively a pain syndrome. There is no neurological deficit as such, and there is no bowel or bladder dysfunction. Studies have shown that there is no neurologic. MRI and electrophysiological examinations are essentially normal. So you find out that this patient doesn't have a neurological deficit, and you think, okay, maybe it is transient neurological symptoms, but then you're still worried. Well, in TNS, pain can be mild to severe. You get reassured that it's going to last for about 2 days, at the most maybe 10 days, but it will wear off anyway. But it's not a nice thing to happen. You have a local VIP to deal with as well. Now we're talking about, do they exist is the question, so let us say whether it exists in the literature. Yes, of course, plenty. Well, the earliest study on the review that appeared on spinal anesthesia with lidocaine, the neurological complications, came out in 1969. It was a prospective review, and the number of patients was 10,440 patients. And there were only about 30 patients who had transient peripheral nerve symptoms. But the conclusion of the study, of course, was lidocaine is as safe for spinal anesthesia as other accepted drugs. But that was in 1969. But in 1993, millions of anesthetics, spinal anesthetics have been given with lidocaine. I am not sure, but maybe there are still some in the audience, in this audience itself, who are still using lidocaine. Well, Schneider came up in 1993. He reported 4 cases of TNS with 5% lidocaine. And the description of that was what I said earlier. And he said the positional stretching of the cauda equina fibers may contribute to enhanced and selective vulnerability of a subset of nerve fibers exposed to 5% lidocaine. And he said maybe lidocaine is neurotoxic. Studies have followed after that. In 1996, Hampel KF compared 5% lidocaine in 7.5% dextrose. He thought maybe hyperosmolarity of that solution was a problem, and then he reduced that and compared it with 2% lidocaine in 2.7% dextrose and with 0.5% bupivacaine in 8.5% dextrose. He saw that the conclusion was that TNS did not result from the marked hyperosmolarity of the hyperbaric 5% lidocaine because the symptoms were same, whether it was 5% lidocaine or 2%. This comparison by Pollock et al. Was 5% lidocaine versus 2% lidocaine versus 0.75% bupivacaine, a prospective study of 159 patients undergoing knee arthroscopy or unilateral inguinal hernia repair. The incidence of TNS was 16% lidocaine, 0 with bupivacaine. 5% lidocaine was the same as 2% lidocaine, and of course arthroscopy, the incidence was higher than in hernia repair. So they went further down. This was Pollock et al. Again. 2% versus 1% versus 0.5%. The same 50 milligram lidocaine was given 109 patients. The concentrations were different, but the percentage of TNS was not. A multi-center, double-blind, randomized controlled trial, 453 patients, short transurethral procedures, as in the example I gave. The TNS was 21% versus 18%, comparing 1% lidocaine and 5% lidocaine. And patients with TNS obviously had higher pain scores because that added to their pain, and the pain persisted for 72 hours postoperatively. So people went down further and reduced now the mass of lidocaine. So this was 50 milligrams of lignocaine, 1% hyperbaric, compared with 20 milligram with fentanyl added. 110 adult patients, ASA 1 and 2, arthroscopic surgery of the knee, all had a block up to T10. Obviously, the time to block regression to S2 dermatome, time to void, time to discharge were all faster in the patients who received less lignocaine or lidocaine, but TNS was 32.7% in patients who received 50 milligrams of lidocaine, whereas it was only 3.6% in the patients who received 20 milligrams of lidocaine. Now, this was a survey done in France on major complications of regional anesthesia, the Regional Anesthesia Hotline Service. This was a survey online. 158,083 regional anesthesia procedures were formed, and they found that lidocaine spinal anesthesia was associated with more neurological complications than bupivacaine spinal anesthesia. Incidence was low, but then lidocaine was distinctly more than bupivacaine. And then there's another study comparing lidocaine, bupivacaine, and tetracaine. In 1,863 patients, lidocaine was more than bupivacaine, lidocaine more than tetracaine. What is interesting here is that lithotomy positions, the incidence was more than in other positions, outpatients more than inpatients, and obese more than non-obese. So if you compare all other local anesthetics with lidocaine, this is one slide where I've got lignocaine, I think. The relative risk for developing TNS after spinal anesthesia with lidocaine was higher than with other local anesthetics. So all the others had less. I think mepivacaine probably has closer to lidocaine, but others are much less. Neural abnormalities have not been really found with EMG nerve conduction study or SSEP. However, some amount of inflammation was demonstrated by MRI in one particular patient here after intrathecal injection of lidocaine in 2002. So that was about TNS existing in the literature. Now, does it exist in my practice? No. And the reasons are, one, we've stopped using lidocaine 5% hyperbaric in our hospital for at least 10 years now. And maybe we don't really follow up our patients so much as to whether they're getting TNS with the bupivacaine, but as from the literature, the incidence is really low. And if there were anything serious, we would have heard about it. Now, is there a problem with having TNS with lidocaine? The problem is, now we have these patients who require outpatient short surgeries, and you give them heavy bupivacaine, and the block outlasts the surgery so much more, and then we need to have something that is short acting. So what do people do to deal with this? One thing is, if you still want to swear by lidocaine and say it is safe, one thing you can do is avoid lidocaine in patients who need surgery in lithotomy, who are obese, and who need outpatient surgery. Yes, the problem still exists with outpatient surgery, or avoid lidocaine altogether. People have tried other local anesthetics, lidocaine compared with prilocaine, and isobaric 2% lidocaine versus isobaric 2% prilocaine, and the TNS was 20% lidocaine whereas none in prilocaine. So you can use other anesthetics. You can try ropivacaine, hyperbaric lidocaine with hyperbaric ropivacaine. You can add some fentanyl to that. There's no difference in motor block, sensory block, and block duration, but in this particular study, they didn't find TNS in either group. 2-chloroprocaine has come back. So 40 milligrams of 2% lidocaine versus 40 milligram 2% preservative-free 2-chloroprocaine. and the anesthetic efficacy is the same, faster resolution of sensory block, but no TNS with chloroprocaine. Well, I just wrote this. I just went on to any topic you get now, you Google, and then I just Googled this particular topic about TNS and lidocaine and what people do. And I just went through the conversation that was going between student doctors. One person writes, I have been using 1 cc of hyperbaric bupivacaine with 25 micrograms of fentanyl for Cerclages bar cystos. I assumed a cystoscopy under spinal. I always get a T10 level and avoid both lidocaine and the TNS. Another person writes 2 ml of 0.25% bupivacaine with 1 ml of 10% dextrose works great. I use this combo frequently, most commonly for hemorrhoids. The patient gets a good sensory block with only partial motor block. They can usually move themselves back onto the stretcher after the surgery. And I like the next line, you look like a stud, having a comfy patient and a good discharge from recovery. Another person writes 7.5 milligrams of ropivacaine with dextrose. It should last only for 30 to 45 minutes. So I'm sure that enough of you in this audience who are having your own concoction to deal with this problem of daycare surgery and having to give a short anesthetic. And we can always discuss that sometime. So coming to the topic of transient neurological symptoms, do they exist? Well, I think if it exists so much in the literature, it probably exists in the people's minds, especially the lawyers. And if you do have a problem, then it's not a good thing to happen. So I would probably avoid lidocaine. So at least when you have a problem like the one I mentioned, one problem is out of your mind, and so you are safer. Thank you.